Hello and welcome back to Angular 2 Masterclass with Alejandro Rangel. In this section of MyTunes, we will be talking about the services and how the services connect through HTTP to external services. So, which external services are we going to use? First of all, we are going to use Last.fm to retrieve the albums. So, you should go and create your own application. Okay, so you need first to join to Last.fm. It's free, so don't worry, and you can use it as an experimental. And from there, you need an API value. Okay, so this is the first thing that you should do. As this is different for every user in time, and if they change the way you register, you just have to go to the Last.fm API and create a new user. Once you have this, you write the API number for your application, and we can start using the API from Last.fm. Specifically, we will use the album.search, this one. And there are two options to get the values in XML or in JSON. In our case, we prefer to use JSON. It's easier to handle in a JavaScript application. The next API that we will use is restcountries.eu. This API specifically get all countries will be super useful for the registration form when the user has to fill the country. And finally, we will use Firebase just for creating users in our application. So we can really start adding new users in application and connect it to MyTunes. Or if MyTunes is already selected by me, you can change the name and put my iTunes, Udemy, my iTunes 1, 2, and so on. What you really need to start working with Firebase once you log in and create the user is this URL here. This is what we need to start storing users in our application. So once we know all the APIs that we are going to use in our application, let's start creating services. So for users, let's close here so it's easy to see. For users, we need a folder that is going to be services. Okay, and we need a user service. Remember, services are singletons. Okay, for single logic, we create a user service, and I'm going to copy and paste the code. It's really long, and let's analyze what is going to happen here. Okay, so what do we have here? First, we are importing the erectjs observable library because as our service connect to an external API, we will be returning to the application observables. So everybody can be waiting for changes of this observable. They subscribe and react to different values. We are importing a user and also user. Remember, these are our models from user. Okay. And let's see which is the API that we are exposing in the user service. We have a variable that is a Firebase URL. Here you should point to your own Firebase URL, so please change this value. Then we have Firebase reference. Okay, this is the instance from Firebase. We have this in red because we haven't added yet the typings from Firebase. So we will do this in the next video. From now on, just ignore this, okay? We cannot resolve this. Basically, we need a typing folder here. In the constructor of our service, once we are initializing the service, we will call the API from Firebase and pass the application ID, in this case this, and we will have the Firebase reference to start working. We have a method that is getUser. All of them return observable, okay, except from the logout. So the getUser will return an observable, and what this function does is it calls a Firebase ref, and on authentication, we get the authentication data from Firebase, and if we have this authentication, we create a new user. So let's go inside this. We pass the auth data, and we create the new user. and we return the observable. So the user can be authenticated or not, and the application will react to this depending on the result. If we try to log in a user, we will receive the username and the password, and again we will call Firebase ref, and out with password, we pass the values, and we are waiting for an error, so we return observable.error, or if the result is successful, we create a new user with the auth data. Okay, this is the API from Firebase. So if you don't know what I'm talking about in this case, I highly recommend that you do the 5-minute tutorial, and they explain how to work with this library. Okay. Then we have the registration. It's kind of the same. We are calling the Firebase API, in this case, create user. This is the minimum information that we have to pass to Firebase, and we're expecting an error or a result. And then we return the user data. And if we want to log out from the application, we just call the Firebase ref and the unauth, that is unauthorize, and we call next. So this is our user service. Now let's go to the music. Here we will need also a service folder. And in this case, we are going to talk with Last.fm. Let's call it music service.ts. This one is a little bit more complex. It has much more information. I paste here. Remember, you have available all the source code. I'm just giving you the hint of what you should take in your mind to understand all this code, and I really suggest that you start coding this application on your own from scratch, and just use the source code as a helper when you are stuck with the examples. So we are using Angular core, injectable. As you remember, we need this if we need to inject, for example, here HTTP. We have already configured HTTP as a dependency here. Okay, so we come back. We have one function that is album search. We pass a query string. This is, for example, our query linking park and the page that we want. Remember that we will have pagination. Then we construct here the URL. This URL comes from Last.fm API. They explain here how you should properly format the URL for making the query. You can just inspire here, and it's pretty straightforward because this is the base URL from Last.fm. Then we are specifying that we want to call the method album search. We pass the album, the query, the page, and we want the format JSON. And Last.fm requires an API key. This is my key. At some point, I could remove this key or delete the application. So you should create your own API ID. How do you do it? Again, you go to Last.fm, you join, and that's it. You will receive an API key. The next is the album info. Here you have the ID of the album. So when you have navigate from the albums to the album page, you should pass the ID and then call again the API to get more information. It's important to mention that we are using the this.http, the GET request. Once we're in both cases, once we receive the information, we use the observable change to map to JSON, and from there, this is the logic for creating our pagination object. Remember that we need to pass the items per page, the start index, and the total results. And we are mapping every album to our albums result array. And we return an object with the albums and the pager. Then we call subscribe, and everybody in the application that is listening to this observable, it's subscribe, will receive the albums and the pager. In the album info, it's exactly the same. We have the mapping to the JSON. Then we iterate through each song to create new song. And we also create an album instance with the information that we receive from Last.fm. To finish with the services section, we need to create a folder, services, in the common. Here we will have the country service. So let's do this country.rb.ts. And this one, it's kind of the same that we did with the last FM. We import the HTTP library, the injectables, observables, the map operator, and our country interface and class. From there, we inject the HTTP library, and we have a function that is get countries. This will call the REST countries.eu API to get all countries. We map the result to JSON. We should do this always. And from there, we are iterating for creating every country inside the array. We return this, so if anyone in the application is subscribed to the get countries observable of this service, then you should have the information here. So these are all the services that we need in the application, and we will talk now about pipes and later on about directive. So see you in the next video.